insights during a long session. So we break every 15 minutes or so for about 2 to 5 minutes, allowing people to mind wander, to share ideas with each other at a table or in the chat. That's what triggers those insights, hearing different perspectives and maybe just like turning off the sound and thinking about these ideas on your own. You'll have these insights. And you'll embed that learning, and it also gives your attention a bit of break so that when we start back up again, you're ready to focus. And we also, the way that we deliver the information also is a way to trigger insights. And I know that because as we design these, the question that we're always asking ourselves during the design process is, what is the insight that we're getting from this session? What's the insight? And if we don't have that, we know we have to go back to the drawing board and figure it out and make sure that insight is what comes out the other side. So that was definitely a learning process when I started building these with everyone. Is we can't just throw all the information in a deck or a PowerPoint and just present it. We have to figure out what the insight we want people to walk away with and make sure that we design for it. So I think the experience that people get out of our summits, whether it's virtually or in person, is that you're walking away with many insights. And we also make sure that we find out if that's true. We often ask that. That's a question we ask at the end of every day. You know, what was your biggest insight? For anyone who knows us, we talk about a scale of insights. So a scale from 1 to 5, we call it the Eureka scale. And you know, how many level 4s or level 5 insights have you had, those really powerful aha moments? And if you had them, what are you going to do about it? So that's what you want in any design. And I know that David Rock talks about this all the time, is when you're designing for best learning, you want to make sure to design for those level 4 and level 5 insights.
Fabulous. And, as we make our way through the conversation today, everybody, our audience members, I just wanted to let you know we will be sharing links not only in the follow-up email, but also in the chat. So we'll share some information about the Eureka scale, as well as I think, of course, one of the other things that makes the summit so interesting and unique is that, of course, as you said, Emma, it's really built around our deep understanding of the science of learning. And so something that comes to mind for me as well is the AGES model, attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. And not only are we designing for user experience and all those things, but really thinking with the end in mind about what it is like to be a learner and ensuring that they're having an experience that is going to, as you said, have deep, lasting impact and deep, lasting insights. Now, these past couple of years are, since the beginning of the summit, but, these past couple of years that I've been here, we've been really, really listening to what's happening in the world, listening to what's happening with our clients in the market and the world of work at large. And each time we craft a summit, we're thinking, what should that core underpinning theme be? In 2022, our theme was Adapt Faster, and we had chosen that theme because so much, as we all likely remember, was happening in the world at that time. Of course, the massive disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic really changed so many things about how we understand work and what we need to do to move forward. And then following Adapt Faster, we saw that the world was still very, very much making its way through that process of shock, pain, and rehabilitation that Dr. David Rock has written about in Harvard Business Review. And so we thought, okay, it is not enough to adapt faster. It's actually that we need to recalibrate the way we think about work. We need to recalibrate our priorities, habits, and systems, and really, really think not just how we react to what's happening, but how we start to build a future. And I'm sensing this really wonderful through line as we make our way from one summit to another. There's a lot of continuity. I would love to hear from you about what you're thinking about this year's theme.
Yeah, I think I'm so glad you brought this up as well. And it does seem like what word can we use to really encompass what's happening again? And again, it's here we are, change is inevitable, and we're having to react to this change in some way. And I think one of the terms that is always on the table is can we use adapt faster or adapt even faster again? And I know my team's smiling in the background of this because it's always on the table, because here we are again and we have to adapt. But what about the idea of evolution? Because evolution is kind of the recognition that change is inevitable, and how do we adapt and thrive despite the change. So evolve is something that, came to us as, this is, here we are again. Change is maybe that more overwhelming, and that's adding to our burnout and overwhelm, and almost maybe even to the point of we're desensitized to all of the change. So how do we evolve in its place? And the extent to which we do that will allow us to thrive despite that. So evolve seems relatively timely, and all of our sessions then are built with the through line of how do we evolve with this current challenge? What are the ways that others have evolved in this? We often bring individuals up who have experienced it, who are doing it with their companies, who understand the underlying science of why it's happening and how to evolve with it or adapt with it. And so we provide the how-to, in the face of whatever challenge we introduce. And so there are many of them, and we're trying to include as many as possible that organizations and people are facing now. And that's something that we'll, touch on a bit without giving too much away today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, we're really trying to listen widely. And so, as we make our way through this discussion, I do want to remind the audience, both on social media and here with us in Zoom, that we definitely welcome your comments, your insights, your questions as the conversation goes on. You're a part of this conversation too. Emma, I am thinking about this theme of evolution and about those core challenges. And of course, we're thinking, how do you strike that balance between being essential and exhaustive? I know that our team has been running, some market research in the background, and really, as I said, listening to the world of work and our audiences. I would love to hear from you a little bit about what are some of the key challenges that are coming up at this point? How are you seeing our focuses, our foci building? Where are the key themes beginning to coalesce for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that one of the things we're planning to do is kind of kick off the whole event with kind of presenting what are the main issues or challenges or obstacles facing organizations today. And I do believe that as we get closer, we might have to, switch some of them out, because as you said, we want to be essential, but the list of risks and worries and challenges that organizations are facing just seems to be endless. But some of them that we think have been continuous throughout 2023 and into 2024 have been things like, how do we approach this continued hybrid environment? It seems that we're still trying to understand what are the best ways to manage performance in a hybrid environment. What are the best ways to really produce optimal performance and to be most inclusive and to lead our teams when everyone is in a different spot, especially with the integration of new kinds of technology. So that's one major challenge I think that we'll have to cover a bit of. What about as we approach the date of our summit, there's no hiding from this highly politicized environment. There are calls for better understanding of civility, of how do we maintain respect in the office place. So all of these kinds of conversations, we'll have to talk about that as well. The integration of AI, we'll have several sessions that talks about AI in different ways, but organizations are still trying to understand how best to integrate, train, to use without inducing overwhelm, and maybe, getting to the point of actually increasing efficiency with using it. So we'll talk about many different ways the AI integration is still a challenge, and as exciting as it is, how to use it to actually boost performance. And with all of this, one of the underlying themes that is continuing, and I think all of us are feeling it, is this cognitive overwhelm and burnout. And how do you solve for this and create an environment of wellness and health in your organization, a healthy organization. What does that even look like? And how do you, fully understand what burnout is? And what we're starting to understand now is it's a lot more difficult to solve than just something like a few days of having, a bit of overwhelm or just being tired. It's definitely a result of a longer chronic form of stress. And increasing globalization. That's another thing that many organizations are facing. They're spreading out, it's maybe intertwined with the hybrid and work from home environment. And then, kind of highly linked to this politicized environment is how can we ignore all of these challenges that organizations are facing as they're trying to move their DEI initiatives forward? And so a lot of these very recent challenges are coming up. And so we can't ignore that as well. So these are just some, and I'm sure that I'm missing others that organizations are thinking about now. We'd love to hear, what are you wrestling with? Any of those that we mentioned are top of the list. It's kind of what we're hoping to get. We love collecting data. So anything that is really sticking out is we'd love to hear about. What are we missing?
Yeah, and as we make our as we continue the conversation, yes, folks, we want to hear about from you. So the question we're asking is, what are the biggest challenges you or your organizations are facing with regard to work right now? Oh, I see how to successfully navigate a growing union environment. That's an interesting one. Thank you for sharing that. Which I think does have a lot to do. I think that actually is an interesting thing. I think it ties meaningfully to our conversations about civility and inclusion and workplace wellness. So, you know, all of these things, an ecology forms, I think, of these themes and how they work together. A big focus I know on Your Brain at Work Live for the past several months, and at our summits, we've continued to build on this over time, is leadership development and what leadership needs to look like going forward. I see that this is actually coming up in the chat right now as we speak. Leaders' discomfort with uncertainty, followed by the needing to provide leadership through unexpected outcomes. And well, if you look at what's happening in the news, as some of the folks mentioned, there are unexpected outcomes taking place basically every day of our lives. So much disruption. I know in 2020 we had rolled out our Focus program, which is very much about thriving through disruption. But now we know that disruption is probably not an outlier. It is basically a fact of everyday life. That's one of the things that I think comes up. But Emma, what are you seeing with regard to key leadership challenges or opportunities that we'll cover at the summit or that we're thinking about right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know it is one of the major topics we'll cover. And if anyone had tuned in last year at all, you know that we talked about it then as well. And so it really wasn't a last year problem. It's a continuous problem. I wonder in some cases has it gotten any worse? I know that if you look at any of the statistics around this, anywhere from 75% and up of organizations don't feel they have like a depth of leadership in their critical roles or believe that the pipeline is adequate. Now, what's interesting is that there are some recent studies showing that organizations are experiencing their largest drop in leadership confidence in a decade. So it's still a problem. And a very recent 2024 risk assessment looked specifically or just found, at least in US organizations, that ineffective leadership was the highest risk. So this is something that's top of mind for all organizations. And what is the missing piece here? So is it that, like individuals don't want to be in leadership roles, or are we developing them in the way that's not setting them up for success? And so we feel that there is a better way to develop leaders. And so one of the things that I know we'll be diving into, and we have been for the last year about, for anyone who's heard anything about our LEAD program, is that there are better ways to develop leaders, and the skills that we are developing in leaders is also different. So those are two kind of separate issues that we're addressing. But one thing that we will cover is this, what are the misconceptions about leadership development? This has also evolved, or how we develop leaders now should be different to face the current challenges and facing organizations and the way that we're expecting to manage our teams. So what are the skills for everyone? Is it and how do you develop them? Are they different for everyone? Do you develop bottom up or top down? And what does the learning look like? I know we've talked about social learning. We've talked about like in the flow or just in case learning. So there's all different ways that we can develop leaders. And we're looking at, what are the best ways to develop leaders, given that they need to be learning in the flow of work, given that they are them and all managers tend to be the most burnt out and the most cognitively overwhelmed. So how can we develop them given the fact that they're overwhelmed? And so that's one issue that I know that we'll have to be addressing, and we are currently developing. But the other, and this is one that probably is also changing often, is what are the skills that leaders need? Successful leadership seems to be one that you need just a bigger bag of skills to pull from. And even for leaders that have been in leadership positions for years, the most experienced leaders will probably still need to dive back into that bag and pull out skills they might not have developed in a while, and they need to update them. So that's one thing that I think I know Evan's dropped this into the chat now. What are the skills that you think that leaders need most? And I bet that we're going to get a huge array of skills. And that's one of the challenges, I think, in leadership development.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to spend a little bit of time on the chat because people are having a rich conversation, which I'm always really excited to see. One of the themes that I'm pulling out as I scan through people's responses is that there is so much conversation about this idea of overwhelm, cognitive overwhelm, emotional overwhelm, overwhelmed with what's happening on the news. And of course, I know in our LEAD program, we talk about the science of managing oneself effectively, which involves emotional and cognitive regulation. That said, what are you seeing with regard to this? I know you've mentioned this idea of workplace well-being so far, and I also happen to know, because as a marketer, I see what's happening in the trends, and one of the biggest trends that I've seen for several years, as well as in our own data, our survey data, people are really, really thinking a great deal about job burnout. It's one of the most searched phrases actually in the world at this moment. So how are we thinking about that, or how might we begin to discuss that at this year's summit?
Yeah, such a great question. And I know that last year we dove a bit into it last year, and it was somewhat right after the time that the World Health Organization had kind of defined it for the first time as a workplace phenomenon. But it's continued to be an issue, and people are continuing to try to understand what's happening in the brain in individuals who are burnt out, because that's the way we really work to understand how to solve for it. And it seems to be, from our understanding now, that it's just a continuation of chronic stress over time. So, when you're stressed and you're maybe like hyper reactive, and small things that might be like really small, like cause a huge reaction or emotional reaction, you're tired or you can't get enough sleep, all of those things are building up towards burnout. And you might just be stressed, which is really not a just, it is unhealthy, and it can cause damage. And we have ways that we can solve for that. But once you get to the point of burnout, you've gone so far to the fact that now you are completely disengaged, and you might not even have an emotional reaction to issues or challenges that you face in the workplace, and your motivation level is completely dropped. And you might even be cynical of like the challenges in the workplace. So it's one of those representations of this has gone on so far. And I think the stressors and challenges that we're facing in all different areas has led a lot of people to this overwhelm, to the point of burnout. And so we're working to understand how you can solve for that. And what's interesting is it seems that the workplace culture is a huge factor in creating it. I mean, that seems to be obvious, but also in solving for it too. So it's more than just saying, and this is well understood now, it's more than just saying, okay, take a couple of days off and you should be okay. It's more about a large pivot in the environment for this individual and for all individuals. It's, making sure that you encourage the individual to heal, but also changing the social interactions in the workplace, maybe the role, maybe changing the goals that they're approaching. So it involves not just an individual change, but an organizational change, kind of the whole ecosystem that is that an individual is experiencing in order to begin to solve for burnout. And I would say there's a lot more that we really need to understand, and we'll be approaching that in a couple of ways at the summit. I think we'll have a session where we're bringing neuroscientists together to talk about like what's happening in the brain, but also experts and practitioners who are in organizations that are thinking about wellness and health, the future of wellness in organizations. So kind of the application of this piece as well. So we're going to be looking at it in two angles, which is needed for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, of course, we need to be thinking about the environmental factors that contribute to or mitigate, job burnout, as well as other, poor, other negative mental health and mental hygiene outcomes. But then we also need to be thinking about how do we address that fitness, that cognitive fitness, both at the individual and the organizational level. So super excited to dive into that. There's lots in the chat, but there's also lots that we want to go over today. So I'm going to continue to respond to some of the conversation that's happening in our community discussion today. But while we do that, Emma, I know that we have got to talk about artificial intelligence, or AI. It has exploded. I remember when it was a fairly nascent idea. I remember when people were thinking that it would be a niche that would come and go fairly, or a fad that would come and go. Well, now artificial intelligence seems to be integrating into basically every technology that we touch. I know I log onto a platform almost every day and I see that little spark, that star that's indicating a new AI feature. So that's always exciting to see. Oh, well, what does this mean? We talked about making AI work at work last year during one of our keynote sessions, and I would love to hear from you about how that discussion is evolving. I know that one thing that we had discussed at that point was thinking about AI not only as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence. I also know that we recently released a white paper on building more human artificial intelligences. We'll share that white paper and our link to that white paper in the chat. But Emma, how has the conversation on AI evolved here at NLI, and what will we be discussing at the NeuroLeadership Summit this year?
Yeah, great. Yeah, we definitely have to, whether we want to or not, talk about AI in the workplace. It's a necessary now, and there's almost no going back in organizations. And we're going to be kind of talking about it in two very different arenas. The one arena we're going to be thinking about this is all around innovation and creativity. And it somewhat sparked from a debate that's somewhat going on around like how creative we can be with AI. Can AI, using AI, boost human creativity, or does it impede human creativity? And we're going to be bringing together experts, neural experts in the field of creativity, innovation, and insight, and really dive into this, really looking at like the brain science of creativity and innovation, and just answer this debate. And if you look at surveys of people talking about creativity, you have about a 50-50 kind of response. So it's a true debate. 50% of people feel that AI will amplify human creativity, and the other half feel that maybe AI will actually limit human creativity. And human creativity, understanding the underlying neuroscience of it, there are brain areas that have been highlighted as brain areas that are causative in generating our ability to be creative or divergent in our thinking. And that's all kind of linked to our mind wandering network. We talk about this often when we talk about insight generation and the importance of being able to mind wander. So how does using an AI tool kind of integrate with that network of us being able to be divergent in our thinking and kind of like tap into those different or creative areas of thinking. But because this is a human network, does AI impede that network from working, or does it augment it in some way? So we'll talk about that a bit. And we would love your thoughts as well here. And do you feel that AI is an amplifier or a limiter of human creativity? And we'll actually use this a bit when we actually talk about this at the summit as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Emma. So we have launched a poll. We would love to hear your thoughts on this matter. And as Emma mentioned, we will be using some of this data. So what you share with us today will really help us to craft the content for the upcoming summit. So you're co-creating the summit with us. Emma, there's another big conversation happening in AI right now that I think that we absolutely have to address, and that's bias and AI. I know that there are some researchers who have been studying this for some time, but as it's exploded, there's a little bit of concern that the technology is perhaps outpacing our understanding of ethics with relation to AI. So what can you tell us about the bias and AI conversation right now and how we're thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so without giving too much away on this, but it's a necessary topic, very different from this innovative creativity topic, is how can we really be aware of, mitigate, and just kind of plan our processes around making sure that we understand and kind of understand and plan for the bias that is built into all of the algorithms, because they are built by humans, but also understand and being able to evaluate them, have processes in place to evaluate them. One of the things that comes up for me is that we think that an AI is producing something that like synthesizes all of the information in an unbiased way, and we take that information as fact. Problem with that is that it's not built, it's built into the system with any number of cognitive biases that could be inherent to the people that are building, the individuals that are building the algorithm. And so taking that as fact is then also that experience bias that we have coming into play without stopping, pausing, and checking that. So thinking about the ways that we can mitigate that, and also thinking about what that does to our own cognitive overwhelm. I know some people are talking about the fact that by using AI tools to become more efficient, we aren't necessarily having to go through all of those daily processes that might have made us less efficient, but now we're spending much more time evaluating the outputs of the AI tools, whatever we're using. And so that takes a huge amount of cognitive load. And so when we're already overwhelmed, are we going to be defaulting to just taking that information and not checking it? So that evaluation role that we're kind of putting ourselves into is adding another cognitive tax. And the question is, will we end up defaulting to more of our cognitive biases because we're already overwhelmed, and just to get the job done and produce it? So, how do we kind of navigate that? And what are the specific outputs, or what are the specific biases we really have to be aware of? And so that's something that we will be covering. It should be a really interesting topic and totally different from the kind of exciting creativity innovation topic that we'll be covering in another session.
Fabulous. Thanks so much. And I do see a number of questions in the chat. Is there any question in particular that you're gravitating towards at this moment, Emma?
Yeah, actually, Donnie, that's a great question when we're talking about Niles, because we did, we are used to working and thinking about mitigating our biases as we work to build our own solutions. One of the things that we thought about as we were building Niles is we are actually only feeding Niles all of our own peer-reviewed or internal research synthesized information. So all of our journal articles, all of our product information that has been only synthesized from the academic literature. So given that, all of that is going to be a bit more synthesized and bounded to that tested literature and tested research. And so by doing that, that kind of allows us to kind of like bound against any of the untested information that's often like grouped into the way AI is synthesized and the information is synthesized, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful question. And thank you for that fabulous response. So we've talked about bias mitigation, performance, a little bit of performance. We talked about how AI can augment performance and potentially augment or perhaps limit creativity. Of course, the through line here that I've been hearing is, okay, performance seems to be changing in a meaningful way, or at least how it's evaluated, how we should be thinking about it. I know many years ago, we published our seminal research paper on killing performance ratings, but now even more change is happening in the realm of performance management. I actually have a multi-part question for you, and this is because I saw this come up a lot, and I know that you've been involved in this work quite a bit. Before I jump into the big performance question, or one of the many big performance questions, one of the things that I wanted to circle back on is I saw a lot of people commenting on empathy, compassion, and psychological safety. Those things are coming up a lot, but you know what else is coming up a lot is accountability. I know that we've recently shared some points of view on how all of those factors come together, and I would love to hear a little bit about how we're weaving our point of view, which perhaps you can share a little bit more about into the NeuroLeadership Summit this year.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is still an issue that organizations are asking about, and we know that some recent Gallup polling has showed that only about 2% of CHROs believe that the performance management system works. So there seems to be still a lot of work to do to really boost performance and manage it and provide the reviews needed, the feedback needed to actually see thriving performance. When we think about the ways to get performance, we've been talking a lot about psychological safety, but psychological safety without accountability doesn't actually produce the right outcomes. And both of those are necessary and can exist in the same space. And so we've done a lot of work in psychological safety and how to create it. We've been thinking a lot about accountability and what are the baseline behaviors needed in an individual or a leader to role model for their team to create accountability. And so we've been just starting that work and developing those integral behaviors of setting expectations and making them clear and making sure you're following through. But then with that, is also needed that sense of a growth mindset. So being able to see where there are errors and going after them and solving for them, having that solution focus. So all of those together seem to be necessary to have to boost performance and produce an organization where you're going after solutions and you're meeting your expectations and setting them in a way that everyone understands. There's transparency in what's expected from leader to team, where leaders are role modeling this, and then creating a psychologically safe environment so that when mistakes happen and when there are complications, that people feel safe to voice them. And so all of those together, we see as like three pillars to creating high performance. And one of the things that's kind of tangential to this, and we talk about this all the time, is the importance of feedback. So having an environment where there is all sorts of feedback, regular feedback, people are asking for feedback, is what we see as an organization that is a high-performing organization. So we'll also talk about how do we measure this, because that's something that organizations are struggling with as well. What are the metrics of a high performance organization? And when we think about a high performance organization, is a high performing culture the same thing? And can they be, are there differences between them? And how can we make sure they're the same thing? So that's one area that we're touching on. What are those pillars? How do you create that? What's the research that suggests like the how to create all of these, meaning that they're not mutually exclusive?
Right. Yeah. And I think that the fundamental question that we really get into is, can you have a healthy workplace that is high performing? I think that, I guess we'll see in our research, but I'm suspecting that I am suspecting and hoping that the answer is yes. And I believe that our research is starting to show that, yes, these aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, you need all of these things to interconnect meaningfully in order to have it. Is a high performing workplace unhealthy? I'm not so sure. I guess we'll see. Um, so, Emma, you are our Senior Director of Research, and I really am excited to share with where the audience some of the things that are coming from our wonderful innovation team at the NeuroLeadership Institute. Why don't you roll out the red carpet for some of the research studies that we're working on now that will be unveiled at this year's summit?
Yeah, we actually have two studies that we're integrating into our summit this year, where we'll be revealing some of the results. We're collecting the data right now. It is really exciting, and I love data. I love diving into research studies. So doing them ourselves is very exciting. I know some of these we've been talking a bit about. One of these we have had a couple of eyeballs about, this idea around workplace connections, and this has been a long project. It's been a collaboration project with Akamai Technologies. And it's a way that we're looking at all of the connections that individuals build in the workplace. And it's a whole new, fundamentally different way of thinking about these connections. And it's more than just the connections you feel with your team, which is important, the connections you feel with your leader. But there are four major ones. And and I would say it's incredibly critical, because this is something that can be a game changer for keeping your employees. So if you're having a retention problem, or maybe even before you have it, you might want to see whether there are weaknesses in some of these connections, and then dive in and be able to build those before you lose your best employees. And we know that's still that's something that we can pinpoint. So we've been doing a lot of this work. I'm not going to reveal anything more about what we know about each one, because I really want you to kind of read our work. We've just come out with one of the first of probably many written pieces about this, diving into the science of each one. Bridget Lynn, who is our director of research design, is kind of the mastermind behind all of this. She's done all of the work here, and so it's incredibly exciting. I know that soon organizations should be able to kind of do that assessment themselves as well. And I think critical for anyone that's looking to really retain their best employees. And yeah, so that's one of them, which is all around the connections that we build. The other one is a really interesting one, a new way of thinking about our SCARF assessment. So anyone who knows NLI knows that one of our biggest and most popular tools is SCARF assessment. I know I use it every day for my own personal life, my work life, and working with individuals, understanding the 5 psychological needs that really drive our motivation or trigger an avoidance response and kind of like a cognitive limitation on being able to work together, is our SCARF assessment. So one of the things that we often get is a question about, how does SCARF relate to our personality? And we've never really actually done that assessment and compared those two. So we started to do that. We've kind of adjusted just a bit. We've added on, I should say, a bit to our SCARF assessment. For anyone who's taken it, or maybe multiple times you've taken it, because I think that's not a bad thing to do, is you take your SCARF assessment and you get your results from your SCARF profile. But then you spend a few more minutes also, if you'd like to take a personality assessment. And with that, we'll be able to start collecting data on how these two things relate. Super exciting. It'll be a true from the lab session. We'll be able to present those results. And we're currently collecting that data. Love for you to take part in it. It's definitely an exciting thing for us. And I think about what the kind of implications this could have. It just might allow us to have a better understanding of how to create the environment we want for ourselves and for people on our team. Just more information allows us to, how best to foster an environment or create an environment to foster performance, engagement, people maybe even related to retention, being able to be, to be a bit more intentional about the environment you're creating for individuals and for yourself, if you have a better understanding.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And folks, I have shared a link in the chat for those of you who are interested in learning more about the SCARF assessment with the personality component woven in. I've shared a link for you. Please take that assessment. It will be very, very helpful to us as we craft our research. And as Emma mentioned, we'll be unveiling some of those findings at the NeuroLeadership Summit this year. Super excited to hear about your results. Please go ahead and be in touch with us if you have any questions about that. So there's so much wonderful conversation. I know that we're approaching the end of our time together. Emma, is there anything coming up for you as we reach our close, or any questions that stuck out to you that we didn't really have the time to get to during the midday session?
Yeah, there's so many great questions in here, and this is actually going to help us as we continue to design. One of the reasons that we decided to do this session today is also to get some of your feedback on making sure that we cover those topics that are really top of mind for all of you as you attend or as we develop. And for anyone who has worked with us in developing these sessions, we truly do develop them as we get closer and closer with our speakers. It's more of a collaborative process. And we just touched on all of the major topics we'll cover, but we have a whole set of smaller breakout sessions where we'll cover things like a deeper dive into accountability, and maybe a deeper dive into what is civility in the workplace, and like how do we really create that, and all of the major trends that are facing anyone who's building a leadership framework or moving forward with DE&I initiatives. All of those major topics we'll be diving into with practitioners or anyone who understands the underlying science to really create the environment for to face these future obstacles.
Absolutely fabulous. Well, I know that we're approaching the end of our time here, and I really thank you, Emma, so much for going through all of it. I cannot tell you just how much I'm looking forward to this year's summit, and I hope all of you are too. Before we pass on to announcements, I do want to just take a moment to let everybody who's on the line right now know that we are currently selling tickets to the upcoming NeuroLeadership Summit, and that our early bird special, which was originally ending on July 1st, has actually continued. It will be going on at least until the end of the month. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that pricing. And in order to sweeten the deal, and because we so appreciate our community, I wanted to let everybody know that for our Your Brain at Work community, we do offer an additional discount code. It's Your Brain at Work 24. And when you enter that at the point of purchase, you'll get an additional discount. So I'll drop the link in the chat. And as I do that, Emma, are there any last words you want to share with the group? Anything that you want to leave? Any deep, lasting insights you'd like to leave the group with today?
No, I mean, I would just like to, thank you for all of your work on these webinars and also in the summit. I know Evan and I have been working with this amazing team developing it. It's a lot of work that we put into it. So, and we absolutely love all of your feedback and your suggestions. So it's never too late to send suggestions our way. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing you there.
Absolutely fabulous. Thanks so much. Well, folks, we're not quite done yet. I do have one last announcement before I pass on to Shelby, and that is that we are also offering a special program for those of you who are interested in registering for our LEAD program. That's LEAD, the Neuroscience of Effective Management. We are actually offering a summit bundle as well. So type bundle in the chat and press enter there, and we'll be happy to follow up with you about the details of that bundle. This is for individuals, so we'll be in touch with you quickly if you share bundle in the chat. And with that said, Emma, it is always a pleasure to connect with you here and basically every day while we're working on this and so many other things. And Shelby, it's always a delight to see you, so I'll pass it on over to you. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both for today's discussion. We appreciate you as always and all the information that you shared. Just a few quick announcements before we close out. As Evan mentioned, Summit 2024 is underway. We're going fully virtual this year, and it's going to take place October 29th and 30th. So make sure you take advantage of the early bird special and discount codes that he mentioned. You can visit summit.neuroleadership.com for all of your needs on that. Insider Exchange, this is specifically for senior executives. If you enjoy Your Brain at Work Live, we think you'll really like this process. It's an opportunity to have roundtable discussions with our internal leaders and learn the latest on insights and things that are coming up down the pipeline. So if that is something that interests you, check that out. And also, we're looking to expand relationships with our community. So if you would like to host an event with NLI, we would love to see if we can partner with you. We'll share more about that in the follow-up email as well. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, you'll love the podcast. We appreciate you listening. We've hit over 1 million downloads, so it's really exciting. We thank you for always tuning in, and you can find it, Your Brain at Work, wherever you listen to your podcast. And this is where we say farewell. So on behalf of our team behind the scenes, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you back next week. Have a great weekend.